The photograph does not shout. It whispers. A narrow girl stands alone beside a towering wall of machinery, swallowed by rows of white spools that stretch into the dim distance of a cotton mill. Dust hangs in the air like a pale fog, catching the light that leaks through tall factory windows, while the machines loom over her like a metal forest. She has grown up inside. She is small, smaller than the equipment she tends. Her dress is simple, already worn at the edges, her hair pulled back in a way that makes her look older and younger at the same time. The floor around her is sprinkled with threads and lint, the silent snow of an endless working day. At first glance, it could be just another vintage aesthetic photograph. Sepia tones, industrial romance, a girl in a beam of soft light. It is the kind of image that ends up on posters, book covers, or nostalgic social media feeds, accompanied by captions about simpler times. But the caption that the photographer left beneath this image kills any sense of nostalgia in a single line. Addie Card, 12 years. Spinner in North Pownell Cotton Mill, Vermont. Girls in mill say she is 10. She admitted to me she was 12, that she started during school vacation, and now would stay. The handwriting belongs to Lewis Hine, a former school teacher turned investigator for the National Child Labor Committee. He did not photograph scenery. He photographed evidence. A century later, a visitor in a museum pauses in front of this very print. People drift past, glancing at the image, reading the caption, maybe shaking their heads for a second before moving on. But this visitor cannot move on because something in Addie's face will not let go. Her expression is not dramatic. She is not crying, not shouting, not even looking at the camera in this version of the scene. She stands with her head slightly bowed, her hands near the moving threads, as if she has already accepted that this steel corridor is her entire world. The more you look, the more the proportions feel wrong. A child's height against an adult's job, a schoolgirl's body inside a factory built for grown men. Lewis Hine understood those proportions all too well. When he arrived in places like North Pownell around 1910, he carried not just a bulky camera, but a cover story. Mill owners did not want outsiders documenting their smallest workers, so Hine passed himself off as a Bible salesman, an insurance inspector, or a postcard photographer. Anything that might get him through the gate and on to the factory floor. Once inside, he moved quickly. He spoke to children in low voices, asking their names, ages, how long they had worked, how many hours they stood on their feet each day. He jotted their answers in his notebook, matching each sketch of words to a glass negative that would later travel far beyond the walls of the mill. On that August day in 1910, when he met Addie, she was already an experienced worker. Other girls in the mill insisted she was only 10, perhaps to make their own ages sound less shocking. But Hine recorded that she quietly admitted to being 12. She had started, she told him, during school vacation, and now she would stay, because vacation was over but the work was not. To reach the spindles when she first arrived, she had to stand on a box. The machines were far taller than she was, their spinning parts coated in grease and dust that stained her bare feet, black in some of Hine's other images of mill children. The rhythm of the factory was a constant roar, clattering frames, belts whipping overhead, the dull thunder of hundreds of threads pulling tight at once. Hine did something radical for his time. He looked at children like Addie not as anonymous hands or tragic symbols, but as individuals with futures that could still be changed. When he pointed his camera at her, he was not just making a photograph, he was accusing an entire system. Years later, his images would be printed in reports, pamphlets, and newspapers, shown to comfortable Americans who had never set foot in a cotton mill. Readers would see the slight figure of Addie pressed against the machinery and read the caption about her age, and something inside them would flinch. Child labor, which had been an abstract political issue, suddenly had a name, a face, and a pair of tired eyes. For a long time, that is all Addie was allowed to be. A symbol. Curators, activists, and historians referred to her as the anemic little spinner, the perfect embodiment of what industrial childhood should never look like. She became, in the words of one later writer, the poster child of the fight against child labor, reproduced again and again as proof that the law had to change. But there was a problem. The more often her image was used, the less anyone seemed to know about the person inside the frame. For decades, museum labels and articles repeated the same basic facts: her name, her age, the location, the date, and then stopped, as if her life had ended the moment Hine packed up his camera. In reality, the story did not end in that mill. Addie grew older, left the factory, moved through the shadows of the 20th century, like millions of other working-class children whose names never appear in history books. Somewhere she had a future, a family, and a death certificate. But no one had bothered to connect those dots back to the girl on the factory floor. Almost 100 years after Hine pressed the shutter, someone finally decided that the poster child of child labor deserved more than a caption. A writer and amateur historian became obsessed with the photograph, following the faint trail of paperwork that began with Hine's notes and vanished into the dust of small-town clerks' offices and forgotten family stories. What he uncovered would turn Addie from an icon back into a human being, and reveal a life far more complicated and painful than any museum label had ever admitted. But that part of the story still lies ahead. For now, the only thing most people see is the girl in the mill, alone between endless rows of spindles, caught forever in the split second when the camera stole her from the noise of the machines and placed her in the silence of history. The question that will drive everything that follows is brutally simple. After the flash faded and the shutter closed, what happened to Addie Card? The second time this story begins, it does not start with Addie. It starts with a man standing outside a mill gate, pretending he is not interested in what is happening inside. Lewis Hine waits just beyond the reach of the factory's shadow, a camera case at his feet and a cheap tie tightened at his throat. He has rehearsed his cover story 3 times on the train. Today he is not a photographer, not a reformer, not a threat. Today, if anyone asks, he is a man collecting industrial scenes for educational postcards, or perhaps a Bible salesman looking for souls instead of shutter speeds. Inside those walls, scores of children like Addie are already at their machines. Some are so small they stand on boxes to reach the spinning frames, their fingers moving with a speed and precision that no child should ever have to learn. The owners would rather the public never see them, never know their names, never question how old they are. Hine knows all of this before he sets foot on the property. He has been hired by the National Child Labor Committee, a young organization with a bold idea: If Americans see with their own eyes what childhood looks like inside the mills, the canneries, the coal mines, they will no longer be able to pretend ignorance. But to get those images, he has to lie, to charm, and when necessary, to trespass. He picks up his case and walks toward the gate. His face is open, almost mild, the face of a schoolteacher, which he once was. It is a useful disguise. At the door, a foreman steps in his path, arms folded across a chest dusted with wheat lint. "What do you want here?" Hine smiles, as if he has been caught doing something harmless. "I am putting together a series of photographs," he explains, careful to sound harmless and just slightly boring. "Beautiful views of American industry, the pride of our nation. People love to see the progress of our mills and factories." The words taste like iron in his mouth, but he has learned that flattery can open doors that outrage never will. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it does not. In some towns he is chased away, threatened with arrest, or warned that accidents happen to men who poke their noses where they do not belong. In others, curiosity wins, and he is allowed inside on the condition that he will not make trouble. This time, he is lucky. The foreman hesitates, weighing the risk of bad publicity against the satisfaction of showing off his efficient operation. At last, he grunts and waves Hine through, as if granting a favor he will later deny. The moment Hine steps into the spinning room, he feels the familiar punch of sound and motion. Machines stretch out in long, glistening rows, belts whipping overhead, gears clacking their teeth in an endless metallic argument. The air is thick with cotton dust, fine and dry, the kind that settles in lungs and stays there for life. And there they are. Children, dozens of them, moving through the forest of machinery, their bodies slender and quick, their faces pale under the factory grime. Some glance up when they see the stranger, then look away just as quickly, trained not to be caught idle. Hine wants to photograph them all, but he knows he cannot. Every frame must count. Every shot must be worth the risk, for the children and for him. He keeps his camera closed for the moment and opens the small notebook that is almost more important than the lens. He starts with questions. "How old are you? How long have you worked here? What time did you start this morning?" At first, the children answer with the numbers they have been trained to give. 16, 14, just helping out for the summer. Hine nods, then quietly asks again, this time making the question personal instead of official. "How old were you when you stopped going to school? When was your last birthday? Can you write your name for me?" The answers change. 11, 10, 9. Some cannot remember the last time they sat behind a desk or held a book that was not a ledger. He writes as fast as he can, his pencil scratching down details that would seem trivial to anyone else. A missing shoe, a bandaged finger, a cough that will not stop. He notes the hour the shifts change, the height of a boy compared to the spinning frame, the way a girl's hair keeps catching loose lint because she is working too close to the moving parts. These are not just observations. They are charges in an invisible indictment. When Hine finally sets up his camera, he does it casually, like a man more interested in architecture than in people. He asks one of the men to stand near a machine for scale, then moves a little further down the row, closer to the youngest worker in sight. The children sense something is happening, the way animals sense a storm. He sees Addie. She is positioned at the very center of the spinning room, where the frames run on both sides like aisles in a mechanical cathedral. Her body looks almost swallowed by the equipment, but her hands move with practiced certainty, plucking threads, fixing brakes, guiding the yarn. Hine approaches, careful not to startle her. "What is your name?" "Addie," she answers, eyes flicking toward the foreman and then back to her work. He asks how old she is. 10, a girl at the next frame calls out, trying to be helpful, or perhaps deflect attention from herself. Addie's mouth tightens in a way that tells him the number is wrong. Later, when the foreman is out of earshot, he asks again, more softly. She looks at him with a mixture of suspicion and hope, as if she is not sure which he deserves. 12, she whispers at last. "I started when school let out. I will stay now." In that moment, Hine understands that the photograph he is about to take must bear her true age, not the lie that keeps the mill safe from inspectors. He scribbles her words in his notebook, underlining them twice. Then he steps back, raises the camera, and asks her to keep doing exactly what she is doing. The exposure takes only a second, a tiny fraction of her 12-year-old life snatched out of the roar and pinned to glass. When the shutter clicks, some of the nearby workers jump, but Addie does not. She barely reacts at all. Hine lowers the camera and thanks her. He wants to promise something, to tell her that because of this photograph, things will change, that she will not always be here in this dust-filled aisle. But he has learned that such promises are dangerous. He cannot control what lawmakers will do with the evidence he gathers, or how long it will take. What he can do is make sure that no one, ever again, will be able to pretend they did not see her. That night, in his rented room, he develops the negative by lamplight, watching as the ghostly outline of the spinning frames appears, then the floor, then the slight figure of a girl. Her face slowly emerges from the chemical haze, serious and unsmiling, and he feels the familiar mixture of triumph and sorrow. He prints the photograph and carefully writes the caption that will travel with it. Her name, her age, the location, the detail about how she started during school vacation and now would stay. He knows exactly what he is doing with those words. They are a knife disguised as ink. Every time a politician or factory owner reads that caption under her picture, it will slice through their excuses. Soon this image will leave Vermont. It will be mailed to the offices of the National Child Labor Committee, studied by clerks, selected for pamphlets, stitched into lectures and magazine articles. Strangers will argue over it in parlors and meeting halls, some claiming that Hine exaggerates, others insisting that the photograph proves he does not go nearly far enough. But for now, the world does not yet know Addie Card. The only people who have truly seen her are the men who own the mill, the girls who work beside her, and the photographer who has just turned her into a question the nation will eventually have to answer. What no one in that moment can imagine is that nearly a century later, someone else will stare at this same image and wonder, if we can see her so clearly here, why do we know almost nothing about what happened to her after the shutter clicked? That second obsession, the need not just to expose a system, but to rescue a single girl from historical oblivion, will not belong to Hine. It will belong to a man who is not yet born, a researcher who will one day open a website, see Addie's tired eyes on his computer screen, and feel the same jolt Hine felt in the spinning room. He will decide that a caption is not enough, and that the anemic little spinner deserves her full, messy, human story back. The search for Addie Card does not begin in a mill town. It begins in front of a glowing computer screen, nearly 100 years after the shutter clicked in North Pownell. A writer, Elizabeth Winthrop, stares at the famous photograph of the anemic little spinner and feels the same unease that once stopped a museum visitor in her tracks. She has seen this image before, on posters and in articles about child labor. But this time, the caption hits differently. The name, the age, the quiet note that Addie started during school vacation and now would stay. For Winthrop, the girl in the mill is no longer just a symbol. She looks disturbingly like someone who could have been in her own family. One question takes root and refuses to leave. What happened to her? The photograph is from 1910. It is now the 21st century. If Addie survived, and there is no guarantee she did, she would have lived an entire life in the shadows of this single, iconic image. Winthrop starts the way so many modern investigations begin. She opens a browser and types a name. Addie Card, Vermont, 1910. The search results are thin, a handful of references that all point back to the same facts written under the photograph: her age, her job, the mill. But there is a clue hidden in plain sight. In the 1910 census, a worker has recorded a household in Bennington County, Vermont, headed by a woman named Adelaide Harris, living with 6 grandchildren. 2 of those children are listed as Anna Card and Addie Card, 12 years old, both granddaughters. The dates match, the county matches. And the name, Addie, is too precise to ignore. Still, this is not enough to turn a caption into a life. Winthrop realizes that following the trail will take more than casual curiosity. It will require the kind of obsessive patience that genealogists and detectives share. So she reaches out to someone who lives for exactly this kind of problem. His name is Joe Manning. Retired social worker, writer, and self-appointed detective of the forgotten, Manning has already started what he calls the Lewis Hine Project, an attempt to track down the stories of Hine's anonymous child laborers and reconnect them with living descendants. He knows how to read a census line the way other people read a mystery novel, how to turn a birth date into a map of a person's movements across decades. Winthrop sends him the photograph and the scraps of information she has gathered. Manning looks at Addie's face and feels the same jolt that captured her imagination. Within minutes, the girl in the mill has gone from being everybody's symbol to being his problem. He begins with what is known. Addie, 12 years old. Spinner in North Pownell Cotton Mill, Vermont. He cross-checks the 1910 census, confirms the Harris household, and notes that the girls are listed as orphaned or abandoned grandchildren, living with their grandmother in North Pownell. Already the story darkens. By the time Addie was 12, her mother was dead, her father gone, and she was living in a crowded farmhouse on a hill, walking down to the mill instead of to school. From there, the hunt accelerates. Manning scrolls through digitized records, the way Hine once moved through factory aisles, searching for small, telling details. He checks the 1900 census and finds Emmett D. Card, a widower with 2 daughters, Annie and Addie, lining up with the story that the girls were raised by their grandmother. Census records can confirm existence, but they do not reveal destinies. To discover what became of Addie, Manning needs to know whether she ever left North Pownell, and if so, under what name. He thinks like a novelist and a bureaucrat at once. If she survived into adulthood, she probably married. That means a marriage certificate. That means a new last name. He starts digging through marriage records for Bennington County. The search is tedious, a parade of names and dates that lead nowhere. Then suddenly, there she is. On February 23, 1915, a certificate records the marriage of Edward Hatch and one Addie Card, both listed as 17, both spinners at the same mill in North Pownell. It is like watching the photograph move. The girl beside the machine steps off the page and into the next chapter of her life, still wrapped in cotton dust, now linked to another worker by law. Manning feels the thrill that every detective knows, the moment when a ghost hardens into a person with addresses and decisions. But the certificate raises as many questions as it answers. If Addie married at 17, did she have children? Did she escape the mills, or did they hold on to her for decades, just as they did to so many others? He follows the new name into the 1920 census and finds Addie Hatch, 22 years old, living not with a husband in a romantic starter home, but in the household of her mother-in-law, Bethany Hatch, along with several of Bethany's children. No children of Addie's are listed. The record feels strangely lonely, like a photograph with too much empty space. The next blow comes from the divorce records. In June 1925, Addie and Edward legally separate, and the court documents accuse her of adultery, charges that may or may not reflect the real dynamics of the marriage. Almost immediately afterward, Edward remarries another woman, suggesting that he too may have been less than faithful. For Manning, this is more than gossip from a distant era. It signals a pattern: instability, economic stress, the pressure of mill life pressing into the most intimate parts of a person's story. He senses that the young girl who once stared into the camera has become a woman constantly in motion, pulled between towns, jobs, and relationships, like a thread passing through too many hands. The trail shifts to Cohoes and North Adams, mill towns where textile work still defined entire neighborhoods. Directories and employment records place Addie and her second husband, Ernest Ernie Lavigne, moving between these places, living in cramped mill houses, struggling with Ernie's worsening alcoholism. At some point, they adopt a newborn girl, the illegitimate child of a Portuguese sailor, and name her Elaine May, a decision that will later give investigators another living branch of the family tree to reach out to. Yet even with this progress, the portrait remains incomplete. Records can show where someone lived and with whom, but they cannot tell what kind of person she was, how she laughed, what she feared, what she remembered about the mill. To get that, Manning needs more than a database. He needs people. He needs memory. Obituaries become his next weapon. He combs through digitized local newspapers, looking for the names Hatch, Levine, and Card, braided together in death notices. One day, in the archives of the Troy Record and other regional papers, he finds what he has been chasing: an obituary for Addie's adopted daughter, Elaine, listing her survivors, including 2 daughters, one of whom still lives close enough to be reached. This is the moment the story threatens to jump out of the past and into the present. Manning picks up the phone, feeling more nervous than he did opening any microfilm reel. How do you tell someone that the grandmother they knew is also a global symbol of child exploitation? Her 12-year-old face reproduced in textbooks and museum exhibits? He dials anyway. When a woman answers, he introduces himself, explains that he is researching the life of a woman named Addie, who once worked in a Vermont cotton mill. There is a pause on the other end. a long, careful silence where disbelief and curiosity wrestle. Then the voice softens. "Yes," she says. "That sounds like my grandmother." In that instant, the distance between 1910 and the present collapses. The girl in the photograph is no longer just a haunting image. She is Grandma, a woman who cooked meals, told stories, and gave warnings about the dangers of men on buses and the hardness of life for women who travel alone. She is not frozen at 12 anymore. She has lived, grieved, loved, and made mistakes for 90-plus years. The phone call leads to an invitation. In January 2006, after 12 weeks of intense research, Manning and his collaborator Elizabeth drive to upstate New York to meet two members of Addie's family face-to-face. They carry with them copies of the photograph that started it all, along with notes, timelines, and 1,000 questions. When they sit down at the kitchen table with Addie's descendants, the conversation is, as Manning later writes, spirited and often emotional. Stories spill out. How Addie was born in December 1897, how her mother died when she was 2, how her father abandoned the girls to their grandmother's care. They recall her telling them about quitting school in the 4th grade to go into the mill, about suffering a nervous breakdown at 12 and being confined to bed for nearly a year. Most haunting of all are the memories of how deeply that early abandonment scarred her. She spoke about the pain of not having a father's love, of growing up feeling cast aside, of walking to work while other children walked to class. The anemic little spinner in the caption is suddenly a child, starved not just of food and rest, but of affection. By the time Manning leaves that house, the ghost hunt is over. He has not just found Addie's grave, he has found her voice, refracted through the people who loved her. The girl in the mill has become a complicated, flawed, resilient woman who renamed herself Pat, married twice, adopted a child, helped raise grandchildren, and carried the weight of her early years until the day she died, at 94. For the first time in almost a century, the balance of power around the photograph shifts. Instead of the world merely staring at Addie, the story now stares back, asking what it means that we allowed one of the most famous images of child labor to stand for so long without knowing what happened to the child herself. And as Manning prepares to share his findings with the world, another question rises to the surface, one that he knows will make viewers of the photograph more uncomfortable than ever. We now know what happened to Addie Card. But how many other children in Hine's photographs never had anyone go looking for them at all? If you walk into a museum today and find Addie Card's photograph on the wall, you might at first pass it the way many visitors do. Another sepia print, another piece of history held safely behind glass. But stay a little longer, and the frame begins to feel less like a window and more like a mirror. You see the girl, the machines, the dust, and, if you know her story now, you also see everything that came after. The marriages, the breakdown, the adopted daughter. The long life that refused to be defined by a single afternoon in 1910. Curators often place the photograph in a section labeled something like documentary photography or social reform. On the wall label, alongside Hine's name and the technical details, there is usually a short paragraph explaining that his images helped push the United States toward child labor legislation and inspired generations of activist photographers. Sometimes, if the institution has kept up with the research, they add a final line. Later investigation by writer Joe Manning and others uncovered more of Addie's life and connected this photograph to her living descendants. That last sentence changes everything. Without it, Addie is still frozen, useful, moving, but distant. With it, the viewer is forced to imagine a ripple traveling from this silent moment straight into the present day, passing through the hearts of children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren who grew up never knowing that their family's history hung on museum walls. One of those descendants tried to express what that realization felt like. In a letter to Joe Manning, Addie's granddaughter wrote that she was overwhelmed by the emotion of seeing her grandmother as a child laborer, feeling both sadness that she never had a childhood and a kind of fierce joy that her image had helped change the law so that later generations could. In a single paragraph, she managed to capture the strange double life of the photograph, both wound and monument, both exploitation and protection. Standing in front of the print, you cannot help thinking about Lewis Hine himself. He died nearly forgotten, his negatives almost discarded, unaware that his photo interpretations would one day be taught in art history classes as the foundation of modern social documentary photography. He believed that a camera, used with honesty and precision, could be a tool for justice. A century later, institutions from the National Gallery to university programs still present him as a model of what it means to have a documentary conscience. But the world the viewer walks back into after leaving the gallery is not the world Hine knew. Child labor, as he documented it, 6-year-olds in mills, breaker boys blackened with coal dust, is illegal in the United States, yet new forms of exploitation have rushed in to fill the vacuum. Children stitch clothes in overseas factories, mine cobalt for batteries, and appear in algorithm-friendly videos, where the line between play and work is dangerously blurred. Hine once smuggled his camera into mills that did not want to be seen. Today, millions of cameras willingly turn on children every hour of every day. Parents, brands, and platforms build fortunes on the performances of kidfluencers, while laws scramble to catch up with what it means for a child to be both a worker and a product online. The questions his pictures asked: who profits from a child's labor? Who controls their image? Who protects them? Have not gone away. They have just migrated to new factories made of code instead of brick. That is why the story of Addie's rediscovery lands with such force. Her life reminds us that the people inside powerful images rarely get to control how they are used or remembered. She did not choose to be the face of child labor, did not sign a release form, or negotiate how many times her 12-year-old body would be reproduced to shake the conscience of strangers. Yet the work that Manning and others have done, piecing together her records, sitting at kitchen tables with her family, restoring her full name and timeline, offers a kind of belated consent. It does not erase the fact that she was photographed without real power to refuse, but it does return to her something Hine could not: context, kin, and continuity. Her descendants now have not only a symbol on a wall, but a story they can tell in their own voices. For viewers, that repair work carries a challenge. Once you know that each of Hine's photographs could, in theory, be expanded into a full biography the way Addie's has been, it becomes harder to treat any image of suffering as just content. You start to imagine the unwritten chapters behind every frame. A child who grows up, a life complicated by choices, addictions, reconciliations, ordinary joys that never make it into the captions. The next time a shocking image flashes across your feed, A child in a factory, a refugee on a boat, a kid performing for a camera in a living room with brand logos artfully placed in the background. You may feel the same tug that Winthrop and Manning felt when they first saw Addie. Who is this, really? Will anyone bother to go looking for them when the outrage dies down and the algorithm moves on? Lewis Hine once said that there were two things he wanted to do: show what had to be corrected, show what had to be appreciated. In Addie's case, he succeeded at both. The photograph shows a system that needed to be dismantled, and the later research reveals a life that, despite everything, found ways to endure, adapt, and matter far beyond the mill gates. Her story becomes a bridge between the world of early industrial America and the world of digital childhood, reminding us that the basic moral question has not changed. When we look at an image of a working child, are we seeing a person whose dignity we are prepared to defend, or just another powerful picture we will scroll past and forget? The documentary ends where it began, with the girl in the spinning room. The frame lingers on her small figure between the towering machines, then cuts, for the first and only time, to the present. An old headstone in a quiet Vermont cemetery bearing the name Adelaide Lavigne, dates stretching from 1897 to 1993. Between those numbers lies everything that the original caption left out, everything the investigation recovered, and everything future viewers must decide to remember.